Good evening and welcome to the NRAS and ARMA Facebook Live this evening. You're all very welcome. I have a wonderful panel to aid our discussions this evening. I'm joined here this evening by Sue Brown, Chief Executive of ARMA, Ailsa Bosworth, National Patient Champion of NRAS, Dr. Bridget Griffiths from the Freeman Hospital in Newcastle, a rheumatologist, and Professor Stefan Siebert from the University of Glasgow. And I know this is going to be a very lively conversation. There's so much to cover. We are going to focus predominantly on the new news about antivirals and monoclonal antibody treatments, etc. But we will be starting with some general questions about vaccines and third primary doses and all those sorts of things. But to set the scene, first of all, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Bridget Griffiths, who's going to set the scene for us as to where we started from, where we are now, and then we'll go straight into the questions. But before I do that, I just wanted to say we on the panel cannot see the comments in the Facebook chat because we're actually on a Zoom platform, but somebody will be keeping an eye on that. So please don't think we're ignoring your questions if you are putting some in there. We have had a lot of questions already submitted, which we will be answering first of all this evening. And then we'll be opening it up to a discussion between us all as things come along. I'd like to very much welcome people from outside the NRAS community. We are joined here with many people from other patient organisations. And while we might focus mostly on rheumatology this evening, because that's our expertise, much of what we're going to cover will be as relevant for those with other immunosuppressed conditions. So with no further ado, I'll hand over to Bridget.
Thank you, Claire. So just as a little bit of background, as everybody's aware, the first case was declared in the UK in February 2020, but I'm sure patients actually had COVID-19 before then. So over 11.5 million cases have been diagnosed in the UK since February 2020. We're all aware of the different variants. So we've had Alpha, Delta, and now obviously we've got Omicron. And it's a rapidly evolving scene. And the news keeps changing on a day-to-day basis, hour-to-hour basis. And the graph or the map on the right just shows how much COVID-19 there is at the moment, with obviously hotspots particularly focused on London, which is the epicenter for Omicron at the present time. So vaccines were first given in December 2020, and I think it's been a really impressive rollout. I think most rheumatology patients have been vaccinated, but for anybody that hasn't, for whatever reason, then once they've had their first vaccine, they can have their second dose 8 weeks later, and then they can have a third dose 3 months after that. And importantly, I think people were understandably worried about having the vaccine when they were pregnant, when this vaccine first became available, but the NHS is definitely encouraging pregnant women to get vaccinated. So over on the right here, we have just a little graph and a little a summary of what's actually happened. So now over 89.6% of the population that's over 12 have had their first dose, and about 82% have had their second dose, and 52% have had a booster or third primary dose. So that was data from the 20th of December. And about 30 million people have actually had their boosters or third primary doses, which, as I said, I think is really impressive. And the NHS and everybody in the UK is to be congratulated in engaging with the whole process. So just moving on to third primary doses and fourth booster doses, which are obviously very relevant to a lot of patients with rheumatological conditions. So if you're going to have a third primary dose or a booster dose, it's usually going to be Pfizer, but sometimes it will be Moderna. So eligible patients are people that are 12 years and older who are immunosuppressed. But I think on the news when I was driving home this evening, I heard that now that's going to be extended to people that are 5 years and older. And it's patients with rheumatological conditions on immunosuppressants are thought to possibly not have mounted such a good immune response to the first and second doses. So these are the people that are going to be or have been invited for the third primary doses and then the fourth booster doses. So to determine who is eligible, It's determined by which drugs the patients were on at the time when they had their first and second doses of the vaccine. So if you had rituximab within 6 months when you were having those vaccines, then you'll be invited or have been invited for a third primary dose. And then for the other drugs, it's within exposure within the last 3 months prior to the first and second doses. So that includes any biologic, the JAK inhibitors, and then the JCVI, the committee that advised the government, recommended that patients, if they were on more than 20 milligrams a week of methotrexate, more than a gram a day of mycophenolate, and some other drug combinations and various doses of steroids, should definitely be offered a third primary dose. Now, logistically, this has been really difficult because it was meant to be the hospital specialists that were identifying these patients, but a lot of our databases don't actually talk properly between different systems, and not always properly recorded or easily recorded so that it can be pulled. So NHS Digital did also do some searches, but I am aware that there's still some problems, and some patients that actually are eligible for a third primary dose may not have been properly identified. So booster fourth doses, these were announced on the 29th of November 2021 in response to Omicron. So these are going to be are being offered 3 months after the third primary dose. So when they get the electronic booking system working in the new year, patients will be allowed to book 91 days after their third primary dose. Originally, we thought that these boosters were going to be given 6 months after the third primary dose, but because of the Omicron variant, the advice has changed. So people need to be aware that they don't have to wait 6 months. It is 3 months as for everybody else that's having a booster. The booster will be a Pfizer or Moderna, and if Moderna is given, then it's only half the dose. Now, I'm fully aware, and you'll all be aware as well, that you can't actually book these doses at the moment on the national booking system. And some patients will have had problems because their third dose was recorded as a booster rather than the third primary dose. So we've been informed that the way to get around this at the moment is you go to a walk-in centre and show your third primary dose eligibility letter, and then hopefully you're going to get these boosters. But hopefully it's going to be easier in the new year. So as time's gone by, we've learned a lot more about COVID-19 and how to treat it. So if you get admitted to hospital, we've got various treatments now available, including oxygen, dexamethasone, remdesivir, tocilizumab and saralimab, and then the neutralizing monoclonal antibodies were first available to inpatients. So it was given to patients who were spike protein antibody negative, and up to just now, we've been using Ronapreve with very good effect. So excitingly, we've got some new treatments for COVID-19 that can be given to patients or offered to patients who are not hospitalized. So they're in the very early stages of their COVID-19 symptoms and disease. So these were announced on the 16th of December, 2021. So we've got neutralizing monoclonal antibodies, which are abbreviated to NMAbs, and they bind to the spike protein and prevent the virus from entering the cell and multiplying. So effectively, they neutralize the virus. So the one that we're going to be using going forwards is called sotrovimab, and it reduces hospitalization or death by 85%. It's given intravenously over 30 minutes. It will be offered to people that are 12 years and over and weigh over 40 kilos. Now, with any infusion reaction, as many people will be aware, if it's an antibody, monoclonal antibody, there's a small risk of an infusion reaction, and this might occur in these patients, but the number of patients that have had these infusion reactions is low. Then we've got the antiviral drugs, and the one that's going to be used is called molnupiravir. I'm sure we're going to be able to say these very easily soon, but I'm afraid I'm not very good at saying them at the moment. They don't roll off my tongue just yet. But again, it's another option that reduces hospitalization or death by 30%. So in the studies, it meant that if a patient had the antiviral drug, that only 6.8% of patients were admitted, compared with 9.7% of patients who hadn't had the drug. If you're offered this option, then you'll be taking some tablets for 5 days. It will be offered to people that are 18 years and over, and this particular option is not recommended in pregnancy, but the neutralizing monoclonal antibodies can be given in pregnancy. So for eligibility criteria, so patients will be offered these or screened to see if they're eligible, if they've had their COVID-19 confirmed by PCR tests within the last 5 days, so very early on in the disease course, their symptoms began within the last 5 days, and they've got one of the conditions or one of the drug treatments that have been highlighted by NHS England for these particular drugs. So I've summarised this on this slide. It is complicated, and it will be complicated when people are starting to work out who's eligible for these particular drugs. So it's all patients who have received rituximab in the last 12 months. It's all patients that have had oral steroids, so oral prednisolone or intravenous steroids, or IV cyclophosphamide, cyclosporin, or mycophenolate, whether they've got stable disease or unstable disease. Then we get into the more complicated bit. So patients who are on biologics, and at the time that they have their COVID have got active or unstable disease, they may be considered for these drugs, but it won't be everybody on these drugs. So the doctors that will be telephoning patients.
Oh dear, I think we've lost you, Bridget. I don't know whether you can hear me. Or is that just me?
You may just be having a blip in her.
Stefan, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. This is.
You can.
I think it might be Bridget's last slide anyway. So
it is indeed. So the only problem is we cannot stop her sharing her screen at the moment. So we will come back to Bridget. Hopefully she'll log out and log back in due course, and hopefully it won't be long before we have her back. Oh, there we go. Lovely. So we will crack on. Some of the something that Bridget was covering there, Stefan, was about how the antivirals will be administered, or sorry, about the boosters, and how the booster booking in Scotland is different. Is that correct? Because you're in Glasgow.
That's right. So people in Scotland will know there's been a mixed picture of whether you've been registered as having a third primary or top-up vaccine or booster on your system, but it doesn't matter. You can, if you are immune suppressed, you can book that yourself. If you go onto NHS Inform or phone the vaccination helpline, but on NHS Inform, there's a book appointment button where the same place where you get your printouts of your PDF. And there's one option is to say you're immune suppressed, and then it allows you to book another appointment, which should be, as Bridget said, 12 weeks after your third dose. So everyone, you can also walk in, but it's much easier just to book that. You can already do that for January, February. So if you've had your third dose now, or in October or November, go ahead and book that for 12 weeks afterwards at the center of your preference using the NHS Inform.
Lovely, thank you. And of course, all of these things are moving at pace. And it is important that, we don't necessarily have all the answers immediately, because things are happening very, very rapidly. As you saw there, that this was only on the 16th of December, this decision about making these treatments were available. And here we are on the 22nd. So things will be changing, and it is important that, and locally it will be slightly different in different places as well. But I wanted to go back with some general questions that had been submitted beforehand. And again, I'd like to reiterate for those of you just joining us on Facebook, I know that you might be putting in lots of questions into the chat. We can't actually see those questions, and we already have had a number of questions pre-submitted, but hopefully many of the questions that you might be asking will be answered because I'm sure they're quite similar to many others. We're still getting an awful lot of questions about when somebody is having their vaccination. I'll put this to Stefan about whether or not to stop their methotrexate after having the vaccination, and that there seems to be mixed messages. So Stefan, first of all, if I can come to you as to what your take is on this, and then Ailsa, I'll come to you as to what your experience with somebody who has lived with rheumatoid arthritis and on methotrexate. So Stefan first.
So the honest answer is we don't know. It's very difficult to study this, and the only real data to support this is from an influenza study several years old now, saying that if you stopped your methotrexate for 1 or 2 weeks beforehand, you are more likely to have a better response to an influenza. But remember, that's a poor vaccine and it's only every year. So because we've got 3 or 4 or 5, I think at the moment, who knows how many vaccines we're going to get. The moment the advice says, and my advice certainly is not to stop the methotrexate, because there's just too many people flaring, and flaring is a higher risk. I think the worst thing to do now, if you were only going to get back one vaccine and never again get another one, I might say something different. But seeing as we're getting multiple vaccines, my advice to my patients is not to stop if you don't want to. There are some people who have been really mild and stable disease and who've chosen with me to stop that for a couple of weeks. I think that's the maximum. I think there's no need to. The Americans suggest you do, but I don't think there's good evidence for it. And the current UK recommendation is not to stop just because of the risk of flare. But everyone's different, and the honest answer is we don't know.
Welcome back, Bridget. I'm afraid the little gremlins got into our system again and we lost you there. That just proves, folks, that we are live. Ailsa, you made a decision about your methotrexate at different points with your boosters and your vaccine. So what was your experience?
Well, I think on the first vaccination, I completely forgot because I just, I just simply didn't remember. But I take methotrexate on its own does nothing for me. It never controlled my disease. The only reason I take methotrexate is to enhance the efficacy of my anti-TNF treatment. So when I heard this argument whether to come off or not come off, it seemed logical to me to come off for a week or 2 before and maybe a week after. I knew that I wouldn't flare as a consequence of coming off, and so I did for the second vaccination. And then I think for the third vaccination, I think because I didn't know quite when I was going to get it, I think I missed a dose after that, and I didn't flare. So that was my experience.
But again, you're taking methotrexate in combination with your biologic, which might be different for people who just on methotrexate.
I'm not reliant on methotrexate to control my disease.
Yes, indeed. There is an awful lot of talk still, and Bridget, you did a wonderful job at clarifying about the third primary dose, boosters, what it's called, etc. But I think just want to clarify, if somebody was given the third dose, third jab, and it was marked as a booster, it will be the same dosage, won't it, as what it would be if it was called a third primary dose? It is
if patients are having the Pfizer vaccine, but if they've had the Moderna one, they've actually had half a dose. But we do know, and NHS England again is aware of this, that was only affected a very small number of people. It's only a few thousand. And I think actually when you go to vaccination centres, they are checking whether people are on immunosuppression so that patients don't get the Moderna one. They actually are more likely to get the Pfizer one, so that then the doses are the same. But there may be a bit of correction that has to be done in the new year, but that won't affect many people at all.
And if for those few thousand, or those few people that have been given the half dose Moderna, would they then be given the fourth jab as the primary dose, as the full dose of the Pfizer?
I think the fourth dose they'd be given Pfizer, and it'd be a full dose, which is, as you say, the same whether you're having whatever vaccine you're having, the dose is the same.
Yeah. And of course, how that is recorded then on their records is very important. And I think it will all come out in the wash eventually in January when we get back up to speed. But Sue, you and I and many of the other patient organisations have had lots of talks about this as well. And about the how to get their records up to date with their GPs. Have you got anything more that you can add to that?
Not really, other than one of the things that the pandemic has been doing across the board is highlighting problems with things. And this particular bit has highlighted the issues with NHS data. and the inability of different bits of the NHS to connect to each other. So I'm rather hoping that a long-term outcome of this will be better for everyone all the time. But at the moment, I think there are still a lot of people who are having to take the responsibility for understanding for themselves what should be happening. And some people, unfortunately, are having to really struggle to get the letters, to go and explain. And then other people are finding it perfectly easy. I'm not immunosuppressed, but when I went to have my booster, I was asked specifically, are you immunosuppressed? And that was because they were using the Moderna vaccine, and the person in charge could explain exactly why she was asking that question and what the implications would be, depending how I answered. So some places have really got the training and are totally on it, and then in other places not so much. And sometimes that makes me angry that a group of people are being let down. And then sometimes I just think, as Bridget said, the astonishing achievement of this many jabs and this many treatment options being rolled out to a population of tens of millions of people, to have got to this point where the confusions are really frustrating if you're a person experiencing it. But it is quite astonishing how few confusions there actually are, given the scale and the amazing achievement of it. So I sort of waver between being really cross on behalf of people who are really having to struggle and having a terrible time and are rightly quite worried, and just thinking the NHS is doing something so incredible on such a scale. It is inevitable that bits of it will go wrong sometimes.
Absolutely, of course. And I think that it is about, as I mentioned earlier, things are moving at such pace. And I think we can't possibly have it all perfect as soon as we hit the ground running with these things, because we're learning, everybody's learning as we go along. But it has been the most amazing achievement, I think. Ailsa,
and also to know that NRAS and ARMA and all the other ARMA patient organisations, they are fighting for this, and they are keeping at it and keeping raising it. And where you ring a helpline and tell them about a problem, that is feeding through to ARMA, and then it's feeding through to the Department of Health and to the NHS.
Yes.
So we are still fighting your corner, and we are keeping pushing until we get this right.
Yeah, Ailsa, was that what?
Yeah, I was just going to say, when I went for my third dose, I said, she said, oh, will you come for your booster? So I said, no, it's my third primary dose. And she said, oh, well, it's all the same. And I thought, no, it isn't. So I didn't think that having an argument there was going to be helpful. So what I'm planning to do is, when I next go into my GP surgery to get my next blood test done, I'm going to raise it then with the nurse when I've got my screen. She's got my record up on the screen in front of her, and I can make sure they get it altered there if it's been noted down as a booster rather than a third primary dose.
Yeah. Stefan, you wanted to come in on that?
I was going to say this along the same lines. I think if it would have mattered, if we weren't going to do more boosters soon, with Omicron's almost forced the hand, and in a way it's going to help. I think the fight of how it's named on your system isn't going to be worth having, because the system's very hard to change. I think the key is that third, there will be a fourth booster, and we can see, we're lucky in Glasgow, we can see how many vaccines everyone's had. I can see every date, and so I have that discussion every single clinic visit. You need a booster, but actually I think the priority is to get a fourth vaccine, which will be a booster 3 months afterwards, 12 weeks after the third one. And I think after that, the naming and numbering isn't going to matter soon, because we're all going to get so many. As long as people are topped up and then get their booster quite soon because of Omicron. And that's why I say I think this isn't great. Omicron's terrible, but actually it's forced the booster system to pick up. And so anyone who's listening who's immune suppressed should make sure that they have their third and fourth booster. And I think the naming will be less important, Ailsa, I hope, because of the system. It may be a fight that is just too much for some people and not worth having, because you can, as I say, in Scotland, you can just book it yourself. You can just put your hand up and say, I'm immune suppressed, go in there. I think England will move their way as well. And by January, February, I think we won't be talking about this because hopefully everyone will have had their 4th one, and then we're on par, if you like. That's my hope. And I guess I just wanted to make another point, Claire, because we did the Octave study that we did, which showed that actually two doses weren't enough, and what the JCVI made a 3rd dose. The data, we've done data in Octave Duo following up people after 3 vaccines. We've obviously, that's the next question, what happens? And that data isn't available yet, but from our data and others that's out there, it looks like 3 boosters for people who are low responders. The 3rd dose really is pushing it high. It really is impressive. There's a small group of people who just aren't responding for a number of reasons. There's certain drugs, but actually just knowing who they are is important. But the vast majority of low responders, what I would have called a low response to 2 vaccines, are having a very, very good response to 3 vaccines. So it does look like the immune system just needed another signal of this vaccine. So that's very encouraging, I think, that the data there.
And of course, that's something that we're being asked quite regularly is like, how do you know? How will you know if you have responded well to 2 doses, 3 doses, 4 doses? And many people are saying, isn't there a blood test I can have that will show me whether I'm, mounted a good response and I can get out and about again? And so far, I believe that there really isn't any robust blood test that anybody could have to give them that reassurance. But I fully understand why people are looking for that reassurance. I don't know if, Bridget, you've had your patients asking much the same.
Yeah, so what I actually do, a few patients, especially if people feel that they can't go out and they're too frightened to leave the home, then actually I can check within the hospital whether they've actually got the spike protein antibody or not. And then most people, actually, I would say about 80% of the ones I've checked have been positive. So then I can put that in the letter and hopefully that reassures people. And then obviously the people that are negative, it's a bit more difficult, but obviously that's not the only response. The antibody measures the B cell response, and we're aware obviously that there are also T cells that help fight this infection. So that's another factor. And then obviously now we've got all these new treatments. So a lot of patients, there are a lot of things we can do now that we couldn't do 20 months ago. So hopefully then patients do find it a bit more reassuring so that they can get out a bit more and lead a more normal life, because obviously that's very important from a mental well-being point of view.
So, I mean, we've said this before on other Facebook Lives on this topic, sending off for, home antibody testing kits is really not something we would recommend because it's not giving you the whole picture at all. So now on to these new treatments for COVID positive cases for the immuno-suppressed communities, which we've heard of this evening, the antivirals, the monoclonal antibodies. One of the things is, you covered a little bit in your slides, but just because I see there's more people joining us all the time, but how are people going to be identified as eligible for these treatments?
So it's a very good question. And obviously it's a very evolving system at the moment because it's actually been in operation less than a week. And I did actually speak to the lead infectious diseases consultant this afternoon to see what is actually happening on the ground and what problems logistically they're having. So what happens at the moment is patients that are flagged as having a positive swab are also married up as to whether they're on the list that NHS England have got as to being more vulnerable or at higher risk if they catch COVID-19. And so basically then these patients are telephoned by the consultant at home and they do some screening questions and see whether they've got one of the conditions that makes them eligible for these treatments or whether they're on one of the drugs that makes them eligible for this particular treatment. And then if they're having the antivirals in our centre, patients actually have to come and collect the drug, but in some places it will be delivered, or obviously it's better if it's a family member that doesn't live in the same household or a friend can come and collect the drug. And then if it's for the the neutralizing monoclonal antibodies, then the patient has to come, and it will involve spending probably half a day, I expect, almost at the centre. It does take 30 minutes, but there'll be some other bits of paperwork. You've got to be observed after you've had the infusion. So it'll probably take a couple of hours, I would imagine, when you get it.
That's useful.
And everybody's rolling it out at different rates. So, for example, in our centre at the moment, we're just doing the antivirals. But again, over the next couple of weeks, it will rapidly change. And I know they're having daily meetings so that everybody around the country that's operating these, the CDMUs, is actually comparing notes and learning from each other, so that then hopefully best practice will happen.
And Sue, we've heard already people are getting letters and getting emails identifying them as people that may be eligible, and they're being sent PCR tests. Can you just give a little bit of background as to what's happening on that?
Yeah, so that's just about making sure that because you need to have had the symptoms started, you need the treatment quite soon after the symptoms started. The crucial thing is to be able to get your PCR test really quickly. So particularly if you don't live near to one of these drive-in centres where you can get it done straight away, if you have a PCR test at home that you can just do and send off, rather than having to order one and wait for it to arrive and then do it and send it back. So it just speeds it up. So the idea is that the people who are identified as likely to be eligible for this will have that PCR test at home, so that as soon as they need one, they can do it straight away and get it sent off. But you can just go to a drive-in centre if it's easier or quicker or whatever for you to go to a drive-in centre. That's not a problem. My understanding is either way of doing it. The crucial thing is to get your PCR test done as fast as possible, so that you can get onto the treatment as fast as possible. But people will be getting emails and or letters over the next few days, and then the PCR test will start being sent out so that people have got those at home.
And just to make it clear, if you have received a PCR test or you're about to get one, the idea is to keep it until you start presenting some symptoms and then to do the PCR. It's not to do it immediately. But if you do use your PCR and you need a replacement one, you're to contact 119 for a new PCR test. Ailsa, you wanted to come in on this?
Yes, it was a question for Bridget. What are the criteria that a clinician in one of the CMDUs will apply to somebody with rheumatoid arthritis to determine whether they would have either the monoclonal antibody or an antiviral? What is the decision process that decides which one you have?
So I think some of it's going to be determined by logistics. So it's whether they've got the neutralizing monoclonal antibody available, or and whether they've got the staff and people to actually be able to operate and deliver it. And so at the moment in our particular centre, people are just getting the antiviral option. They're not having the neutralizing monoclonal antibodies. And I think the idea is that people will get the neutralizing monoclonal antibody if it's available. And then if not, then they will get the antivirals. That's my understanding. And Stefan may want to comment as well.
So I think some people, Ailsa, may even get both. So I think timing is key, So I think we don't know yet because they haven't been tested against each other. So Bridget's completely right. It's logistics and the key is getting it quickly. And but in some of the people that we think we're really worried about. And remember, we worried about two groups of people. One, people we think might get quite severe COVID. So that may be quite a big group. But then we really worried about the people where we think even 3 or 4 vaccines hasn't done the trick. So those are the people who really get prioritized because they are double risk, aren't they? Whereas, as I've already suggested, I think a lot of people that we would have thought of on the old shielding list will actually do really well after 3 and 4 vaccines. So their risk will have gone way down. And actually, yes, they still got the condition and the treatment, but actually the vaccines have done the business, the vaccines. So that's why getting your booster is still the key. And the encouraging thing is even for people who feel, oh, I'm in this little group of people who probably haven't responded as well to the vaccines, even with 4, those are the people that this system is really trying to pick up. Those are the key people saying, these are the people we really want to make sure they get treatment as soon as possible, and they will be prioritized number 1. There's a list of priorities because they're at risk on both those levels, whereas the other people we say, actually this would be sufficient. So it'll be an evolving process, I think, as we go along, and it will vary, as Bridget said.
I don't know when you lost my slides. I
think it was on the very last one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so because I did list which drugs and things, so it's important if people have had rituximab, they definitely will be eligible for these treatments. If they're on steroids, they're definitely eligible. If they're on mycophenolate, they're definitely eligible. If they've had cyclophosphamide, they're definitely eligible. It's the others are a lot more nuancing, which will depend upon how active people's disease is at that particular time, and perhaps what dose of drugs they're on and what combination.
And you mentioned steroids then, and of course steroids, high doses, low doses, whether you have a depot or whether it's regular oral steroids. I mean, we talk to many patients who just can't get off of steroids. They're kind of on regular steroids. So would they be in that category, Bridget?
Yeah, so we've been having discussions amongst the clinicians because it's not clear in the guidance in the policy as to what dose of steroids or which route. And so we feel that actually everybody that's on any dose of steroids, oral steroids or intravenous, should actually be flagged up as a potential patient. And probably if you're on oral steroids, then you're going to be on other drugs as well. So that will increase your eligibility. So actually, probably, I suspect most patients on steroids of any dose will be offered these new treatments. And then the sort of caveats are if you're on biologics and got unstable disease. So it may be if you've recently had a steroid injection intramuscularly or intraarticularly, then that actually may be something that makes you more eligible for these particular treatments. But that will be involving the doctors asking the patient about some screening questions.
And I think that's why it's so very important for you as individual patients, on not just rheumatoid arthritis patients, all the other people that are joining us here this evening that might be on immunosuppressed medication or suppressing medication, that your medicines and what categories they fall into. For those of you on RA, we've got an excellent booklet on RA medicines, so you can see what category they fit into, and I'm sure all the other patient organisations have similar information about their medications. So do take the time to understand what medicines you're on and what category they are. Stefan, did you want to come back in on that?
I just wanted to make 2 quick points. One, the complexity is that it probably matters what medicine you were on at the time of your vaccine rather than just now. So Bridget's right. I think all steroids will just be captured just to be safe, because we know steroids go up and down. But there's a lot of complexity here the system can't capture. And people will be identified as being eligible from their medical records and from GP prescribing. So the sort of methotrexate drugs will be picked up from GP prescribing. We've already had an email today saying, can we make sure that our list of biologic patients has been updated in Scotland so that they've got that. And so that'll happen on multiple levels. So it's what Sue was describing, trying to put data from different things together. And some of it's more manual than you'd like it to be, and some of it's less manual. But again, you are the common, as Claire said, you are the common denominator in here. And so knowing that, but just being aware people are putting data together. And the second bit I just wanted to make quickly is just to highlight for people in Scotland, and I think it may be different in Wales and Northern Ireland as well. You will be getting a letter, which I've seen as well, and they're being sent out slightly later, and they may get delayed over Christmas. But the letters are coming saying you're on this eligible list with information. But just to be clear, in Scotland, you will not be sent a PCR test, so that you will still be getting the PCR as quickly as possible. And then as Sue described, if your PCR flags up as positive and you're on the list, the system will bring you together and someone will say, we need to call this person and make a decision whether they should be or whether they need to be treated with these treatments as well. So just to be clear, not everyone will, certainly in Scotland, I think devolved nations will be getting PCR tests. So don't worry if it seems different.
Yes. Sue, you wanted to come in on that?
So just to add to that, if for any reason the system doesn't put those 2 things together, so if you've had a positive PCR test and you've had one of these letters, and 24 hours after your test result, you still haven't had the phone call, the letter tells you who to call. So it is your GP, if it's in hours, and NHS 111 if it's out of hours in England. So there is a mechanism for you to say, hold on a minute, I think I should have had a call, and please can you check that and put me in touch with the right people. So even after you've had your letter and you've done your test and got your positive, there is still obviously the possibility that something goes wrong and those two things don't get put together. And there is a mechanism for you to take action if that is the case.
And if there's anybody that's newly diagnosed, so they weren't identified in the first wave of those who are clinically extremely vulnerable, but they feel that perhaps they now do fall into that category and they haven't had a letter, what should they do, would you suggest? Would you like to answer that? Sue? Oh, Bridget.
No, I was just going to say, actually, if people feel they should be on this list or being called, also, I think most rheumatology departments actually are very happy, or whichever speciality you fall in, would be happy to be contacted via the advice line. So we certainly have had a lot of patients calling us throughout, telling us that they've got COVID, and our connective tissue disease nurse specialists in particular, I work very closely with, have been giving patients advice, and we will just continue to give advice. And obviously we're working very closely with the CDMUs. So I think that's another avenue, because our nurses feel that actually, although the letter says ring your GP practice, they actually find that patients actually get through quicker if they ring 111 during daytime hours as well. So I think it's 111 and probably your rheumatology department, who can then link in very quickly with the CDMU so that you can be screened.
And just to reiterate, ourselves and the patient organisations are regularly updating our website with all of this latest information, the links where to go for the information, etc. And the same with ARMA. And I would just like to say a huge thank you to Sue's leadership of ARMA, bringing all our patient organisations together, because we all have these same common concerns, issues, and wanting reassurance. So it's been, it's been a real silver lining to a horrible cloud that has brought us all together, because we are all working very closely and making sure, as Sue said earlier, that your concerns, you're filtering them through to us as your patient organisations, and then we're filtering them through ARMA up to NHS England or NHS Scotland, etc. So it is important that you keep communicating with us and letting us know where there are problems, definitely. It leads me on to now the Panoramic study that's happening. And this is something that is a study looking at people who have tested positive after having the vaccines. I'm just getting my little piece of paper here in front of me. So in October 2021, the UK government announced it would make 2 oral antivirals available. And this is developed by MSD, and people at the highest risk or at risk of COVID-19 will be not eligible for this study, but there will be other people that can be part of this study. And in fact, Stefan, you are taking part in this study because you unfortunately did fall for the dreaded COVID. And I thought it'd be interesting to hear your experience of being part of that study and having COVID and being a recipient of the antiviral. So
yeah, so unfortunately, I meet the age criteria for Panoramic. There's a 50-year cutoff, which is very depressing. But the Panoramic is trying to become a platform study like Recovery was in hospitals. So Recovery was how we found those treatments in hospital. Panoramic's trying to do that in the community. And the first line of treatments you get in Panoramic are the antivirals. It's the same one, the molnupiravir, that Bridget mentioned, that you'll get on through the treatment centers as well. And so because Panoramic and immune-suppressed people can go in there as well, the difference is you get randomized to standard care, which is no treatment, which is standard treatment, but no specific treatment, or the antivirals. And I think in future, they will also include monoclonal antibodies and other drugs as they come online. And I must say, I felt pretty bad when I got surprisingly bad with COVID 2 weeks ago, or 2 weeks ago. But actually, I signed up. I thought it's a bit hypocritical to ask people to do my studies and then not to take part myself. So I joined up. It was super easy to sign up online. The entire consent was online. The drug arrived in the post the next day. Someone phoned me, screen check that I was ready for it, was eligible. They did all the screening to check there's no pregnant partner and make sure it's safe. And the drug arrived in the post the next morning. It was a tablet taken, 4 tablets twice a day for 5 days. I didn't have any side effects. I found it super easy. I had to fill in a diary, which literally took 2 minutes a day. And really, that's how we learned what we have and how we can keep learning. So I guess, one of the things I would say to my patients, and some of you may want to consider this as well, is that even if you've been through the system that we've described and you don't meet the criteria because you're not in what we would call the people where we've prioritized that these drugs should be used, you may still want to think about taking part in studies like Panoramic, and you may still be eligible, because the problem with doing things in real life and giving it to everyone is we don't learn, because we make a decision. I think you need it. I think you don't need it. So I've already made a decision. But in the study, it's a 50-50 call. And that's how we learn which drugs really work well. And I think, one of the problems with any of these antiviral drugs and the vaccines is they weren't tested in immune-suppressed people. So this is an opportunity. It's almost another second bite of this cherry to go on. And I think it will tell us how well these drugs work in immune-suppressed people, in addition, support what we're doing in the clinics. So I guess just to highlight that, one, if the research studies come available, you actually, when you get a positive test, it was on my email, on my text that I got with the positive test. So it was very easy to join up. So have a look. There's lots of other studies going on. And I think it's important that all sorts of people, including immune-suppressed people, are included in these studies.
Absolutely. And it is this data, this gathering of real world data, that has got us at pace to where we are now. And so I would really, really encourage, if you are invited to take part in a study like this, please do consider it seriously, because it's giving us all the evidence that we need as to how to get on top of this virus and hopefully get back to some sort of normality again. Sue, you wanted to come in on this?
Yeah, just to check, I think I'm correct in this, Stefan. So this particular study, the Panoramic study, this is not about testing these drugs. Are they safe? Do they work? That bit's already been done. Correct. It's about testing how do they work in a real world situation and who most benefits from them. So, I also meet the age criteria for this one. And I can tell you, if I get a positive COVID test, I'll be joining this without any question, because it will give me a 50-50 chance of getting a treatment that we know works and we know is safe. So this is not like taking part in one of those trials where the drug's only just been designed and you're testing its safety. This is about testing how does it work in the real world. So I would definitely encourage people to consider it.
That's a really valid point. Thank you, Sue, for making that point. It is very clear that these antivirals are effective and working, and it's just finding out how they work on a bigger scale. I think they're recruiting something like 10,500 people to this study at pace again. Hopefully getting that 10,500 people within 6 to 8 weeks. So that is phenomenal, and hats off to the researchers who are going to be studying all these, all the questionnaires and all the analysis that will go on. But and again, soon as we hear the results of those this study, the same as we have done with Octave, etc., we will be sharing it out through our websites, as with the other patient organisations. Ailsa, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just a question about these drugs actually, because are they drugs that have been either adapted from other already available antivirals for COVID, and have they just been used during COVID, or were they already being used in other antiviral situations like HIV, for example, before COVID came along?
So most of them already had a bit of a track record that they've been tried. They interfered with other viruses, because remember, the antivirals stop the virus growing. They attack the virus. The monoclonals, as Bridget mentioned, sort of mop them up. So the current one has actually been developed more specifically, but the next line of antivirals are even better. The good news is there's a it's Paxlovid, which is coming online soon. The data that's come from an HIV drug that they've modified, and that looks super effective, you know. So the field isn't standing still. It's, you know, there's already new stuff coming in. And as Sue described, this is almost saying, how well do these work in the real world, so that when the next ones come, we can say, actually, that's been okay, but let's use something better, or this one is better, you know, so we can already get real world data and help with the decisions. But some of them are modified, so they have actually been around for a lot longer, a lot of them, and the technology isn't new. So it's not new stuff, it's just modifying it and testing it.
We spoke just a little bit before coming on air about many people will have heard in America that they've got drugs as a preventative rather than an actual treatment for COVID. Now, they're not licensed over here for use at this point, but Stefan, have you got any more information on that? Yeah, so there's some longer acting monoclonals. So the current monoclonals are quite short. So in other words, you've got COVID as we described. Let's mop up as much as we can as quickly as possible so that you don't get as sick. You know, that's the basic how these ones work. But actually, there's some monoclonals that hang around for 3 to 6 months. That's what's been said, you know, 3 months. So that they're being tested and they're looking like promising for being preventative. So in other words, let's say you're in the group who is very high risk of COVID. You know, this might not be a rheumatology condition. It might be transplants and other conditions. You have very high risk of COVID and your vaccines haven't worked. These monoclonals may be given preventative to these people. So there's some people with primary immune deficiency. They just haven't got an immune system. They might be given this infusion every 3 to 6 months to see if they can actually prevent them even getting the first signs of the COVID. So that's almost the next line. But again, you can imagine you wouldn't want to give that to everyone. Yeah, I wouldn't want to take that. But actually to those people where we really don't even want them to get even mild COVID. So there will be big strategies coming, but those aren't available yet. But again, just to reassure that, you know, for most of us, vaccines are brilliant. They're brilliant. They really are. I think even for most of our immune suppressed patients, 3 or 4, the third dose with a booster is going to be very good. And then there's the people where the vaccines aren't quite getting that, where we want extra steps. So we're getting lots of extra steps. But again, I would highlight these are almost bonuses for those people that we're really, really worried about. But for most of us, we're not going to need this. The good thing is most of us really won't need these. And the vaccines and getting the boosters is our primary job, you know, for all of us. But just to reassure you that actually the field doesn't just say, oh, these people are too difficult. This is too difficult. This medicine is too difficult. The field's saying, how can we protect our most vulnerable people despite this virus being here and despite the vaccines not working? So that's, you know, just to reassure you that actually this field is moving towards prevention for those people as well. And I think, you know, you make a very valid point there about I've said it before, the pace at how rapidly things are being examined, how trials are being done, and the learning is amazing. And I think we'll probably look back at this period of time as the most monumentous time of scientific discovery, even though it's the most dreadful of times for anybody going through COVID or having lost people to COVID. But it is, from a scientific point of view, the most amazing time for development, and it will continue to be so. I think we have to probably accept that COVID isn't going to go away suddenly. I think we're going to learn to live with COVID the same as we do live with other conditions, but we'll have a far better handle on how to live with it and how to control it. Ailsa, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I totally agree with what you just said, Claire. But one of the things, if you remember, when we were having the briefing earlier in the week from NHS England, was asked by one of the Afro-Caribbean patient groups who was asking a question about equality in assessment. And that was something that, given the work that we're doing with South Asian populations in the UK, that really caused me to kind of sit up and think, right, what do we need to do about our patients out there who may be from South Asian populations who may not be accessing this kind of information as easily as people who don't have maybe language or cultural barriers. And we've already seen the equality issues around COVID itself on different ethnic minority populations in the UK. So should we all be, as patient organisations, really mindful of how we reach communities that may not be engaging with or know how to engage with 111 or 119 services and so on. I just wondered what you might think, Bridget and Stefan.
I mean, I think I agree. It's very important, and I think possibly too that's where the departments can help, and the specialist nurses and advice lines. Obviously, hoping that people are going to call us, but we are there to help. And I think people are mindful of the different risks according to different ethnicities and age as well. So I think, as you say, anything you can do, which you're very good at on social media in different fora with different people from different ethnic backgrounds actually promoting things, I think that does help.
I think, yeah. Sorry, Sue.
So I was just going to say the NHS has done spectacular work in terms of the rollout of the vaccine to communities that were initially hesitant. And that question just makes me think the people who did that could do with cascading information about all of these antivirals and treatments through that same mechanism to make sure that those communities get the messages about this, because some of them will be hesitant about new treatments in the same way that they were hesitant about new vaccines. So the NHS has mechanisms for reaching into a lot of those communities. I don't know what we can do to try and get that, because that's obviously a very local thing. It's very much working with local communities. But I think we should think about how we can use those mechanisms to get this message out as well.
Yeah.
And sorry, Stefan, you were just I think we've got about 3 minutes left.
I agree with everything that's been said.
That's good. So I just wanted to wrap up with sort of a summary, if you like, of our discussions this evening, but also, you know, the discussion that we had with NHS England yesterday, that, you know, there are antiviral treatments out there that some of you will be eligible for. It won't be your GPs prescribing them. It will be the CMDUs, which is the COVID medicine deployment units. I love the NHS. It's always got to throw in a few new acronyms for us to get our heads around. You will be getting letters, many of you, depending on where you live in the UK. You might just get a letter. You might get a letter with a PCR test. Please don't do that PCR test unless you have developing symptoms. That's what it's there for, and that's to really speed up the process of you being treated if you're eligible for treatment. The Panoramic study is going to be incredibly informative if you do have the opportunity, or if somebody in your family or you know somebody who is being approached and they're going, oh, I'm not so sure. Please do encourage them to take part in these studies, because it's, as Stefan said, you know, it's super easy. It's not really invasive. You'll be taking the medication if you are chosen to take the medication, and fill in some very simple, straightforward questionnaires. So there is real hope. There is real reason for optimism. I know I've always been a bit of a glass half full sort of person, but I really do feel that this is the beginning of the next chapter in this fight against COVID. But I think we do have to be realistic and know that we are going to probably live with this virus and perhaps other viruses like this in the future. And I think it's been a really great global learning for us all. But remember, none of us are safe until we are all safe. And I think that's very, very important that, you know, if you know people who are reluctant about getting their vaccine, please do encourage them. Show them this sort of resources, or point them in the right direction. Encourage them without being judgmental, because we, you know, lots of people have anxieties for all sorts of different reasons, but it is really, really important that the more of us that are vaccinated, the better the opportunities for really getting back to some sort of normal life. I know it's going to be a very difficult Christmas for very, very many of you, and I wanted to just take this opportunity to wish you all a very happy and healthy Christmas, to thank all our panel this evening, and I'll just go each one of you to have one last word to our audience this evening before we see 2021 out and herald the opportunities that 2022 might offer us. So I'll come to you, Ailsa, first for a final word.
I totally agree. I think this is a fantastic further step forward in the fight against this disease. And I have to say that I've certainly found Omicron rather alarming, harking back to those alarming days of the first lockdown where we weren't really sure what was going on here. I've got a daughter in London, and London is the epicenter, so you do worry, but this is a great news for people. The Panoramic study also huge step forward. So I'd like to just join with Claire and wish you all a very happy Christmas. Stay safe and have a good time.
Sue.
Similarly, just looking, I know everyone is going to be having a quite difficult Christmas, but if we look back to what Christmas last year was like, we are in such a completely different position. And people who didn't respond well to the vaccine, I know were a bit worried that, all of it was hinging on vaccines. It isn't anymore. So there is some real hope for 2022 that definitely was not there as we came into 2021. But the other thing I would say is, where you are having problems, where you are having difficulties, make sure that NRAS or whichever relevant patient organisation knows about that, because we do have these mechanisms to feed into government and the NHS what is happening in the real world, and they are listening, and people are talking about how to solve problems that we know are coming up. But we only know that because you tell NRAS and NRAS tells us, and we take it through the system in that way. So please do keep in touch with patient organisations, and have a happy Christmas.
Thank you, Sue. Bridget.
I agree with everything that's been said. I think we're in a much better place. Obviously, we've learned an awful lot. I would recommend that when people are offered a vaccine, that they take it, and that basically we've got all these new treatments, and again, do consider them, and if you're eligible, do make sure that you can contact the right people to see if you're eligible for these new treatments. And I think still remember all the other things that we were doing last year. So do wear your mask, do a bit of social distancing, do wash your hands, and don't go to very crowded places, but do enjoy yourself and do get out and mix with people, and have a good Christmas and Happy New Year.
Thank you, Bridget. And final word, Stefan.
I agree as well. I think we're in a different place. This isn't the same, Ailsa, fortunately, if we didn't have all the tools we've got. Yeah. And I would just, I think we will learn to live with this virus. And for this group of people, for you, I recognize that's often felt like we being the people who aren't immune suppressed. But actually, I hope that what we've discussed today shows that the system isn't perfect, but actually vaccines work on a population level. There are processes being put in place for the most clinically vulnerable people so that we can all live with this virus. Some of us are going to need more treatments and have more preventative things in place, but we'll all get to the place where we can all accept that this virus is there, but we can get on with our lives and no one is left behind. And I hope that that's, what we've discussed and what's coming reassures you that actually, even though you've often felt left out, that's not true. People are thinking about you, and all of us with NRAS's help and ARMA's help are making a noise to make sure you aren't forgotten. And that's the main thing. I don't think anyone will be left behind.
Thank you. We certainly will be here for you right through all of this and into the future. So do keep in touch, as Sue said, with your patient organisations. We are your listening ear, and we will take your concerns to those that can maybe make a difference. I would like to say thank you to everybody. We've had, at some stages 150 odd people watching us this evening. You can watch this back. There was an awful lot of information here. So it will be recorded, and we will be sharing this recording with the other patient organisations as well to have to hand. So you will be able to go back and think, what did they say about such a thing? You'll be able to watch it back. And on that note, I'd like to say thank you again to my wonderful panel this evening. Thank you for listening, and I hope you found that helpful, and stay safe. And remember, my favourite hashtag, or my personal hashtag, is not back to normal, but forward to better. We will get there. Good night. Stay safe.